These days, it's very easy for us to play games way too fast, skipping through the dialogue, rushing through the quests so that we can quickly get the rewards. We skip the small details, the things that really matter, the things that tell the full story, and then we wonder why the experience doesn't feel as special as it used to. We wonder why the game doesn't fulfill us or stay on our minds. To be honest, games are so much better when you just slow down. I know you've probably heard it a million times, I've even mentioned it a few times in my other videos, but have you ever truly given it a go from start to finish? I promise you, when you take your time, when you read the dialogue and you immerse yourself in the lore, read the notes and the logs and pay attention to all of the additional information and content, the worlds feel so much richer, stories feel deeper. These little bits of lore may not contribute much to your current quest or objective, but they help enrich in the experience. They bring the world to life. They make it feel credible, almost like it's a real part of history, something that's really happened here or somewhere else. The fact is, slower, more deliberate focus creates stronger emotional connection. This episode is about a simple habit that makes games feel more meaningful again. A way to reconnect with the worlds that you love, reduce that sense of rushing to an end point and just let yourself get fully absorbed in the experience, how gaming used to be and how it still can be. So let's explore how slowing down can genuinely make gaming healthier and a lot more immersive. Games today naturally move you along quickly. You achieve one thing, you reap the rewards, and straight away you're being tempted with the next set of rewards, the better rewards. Games keep you grinding in an endless cycle of task and reward. It's a design trend that works for your engagement but doesn't work for your immersion. When the pace pushes you forwards non-stop, your brain barely has time to register what you're actually experiencing. It's like skimming through a book and wondering later why the story didn't resonate with you, or why you can't remember everything that happened. Yeah, you get all of the dopamine hits and some people are okay with that, but in my opinion that's not what gaming should be about. Slowing down changes the way that your brain processes a game. One of the clearest examples comes from research on narrative attention. Psychology studies have shown for years that people absorb stories more deeply when their cognitive load is lower. A well-known paper published in Scientific Studies of Reading found that readers who engage with fiction at a slower pace reported stronger emotional involvement and remembered significantly more detail. Some games work on the same principle. Slower engagement leaves more mental bandwidth for the world itself, not just the mechanics. There's also the effect of sensory absorption. Game designers rely heavily on environmental cues, so things like lighting, texture work, sound layers, subtle animations, all these things pull you into the world. But these elements are processed by the brain much more effectively when attention isn't divided. Neuroscience research on visual processing shows that the brain identifies and stores environmental detail more accurately when attention shifts less frequently. Fast play creates constant micro shifts, things like checking your map, glances at the HUD, pop-ups, objective updates. When the pace softens, those shifts reduce, and the world starts to feel less like a set of tasks and more like an actual place. Another reason that slower play feels better is because it reduces what cognitive scientists call attentional fragmentation. A study from the University of California found that frequent task switching, even tiny switches like opening the map, increases mental fatigue and weakens immersion. Most games trigger this constantly without players even realising it. Slower pacing naturally limits those switches and your attention becomes steadier. That stability makes it easier to settle into the world and stay there. Dialogue is another area where this difference becomes obvious. When you allow conversations to unfold at their intended pace, characters feel well written, more grounded. Their tone, their rhythm, all the pauses, it all adds meaning and realism. Skipping or rushing the dialogue breaks the emotional pacing that the writers intentionally build. Media psychologists have found that emotional comprehension increases when viewers process dialogue at its natural timing rather than through condensed or sped up delivery. Gamers often forget that story scenes are crafted with pacing in mind, and slowing down lets the writing work the way it was intended. Slowing down allows a story to be delivered effectively. There's also the simple pleasure of curiosity, a part of gaming that gets lost when everything turns into a digital checklist. Exploring an area at your own pace, without rushing, This opens the small details that developers hide in plain sight. Environmental hints about past events, subtle world building choices, these become easy to appreciate when you're not sprinting everywhere. In fact, environmental psychologists have pointed out that slow exploration, even in virtual spaces, can increase feelings of presence and reduce stress, because your brain interprets it similarly to wandering in the real world. Real life walks and walking in an immersive game have very similar calming effects on the mind. And then there's the emotional connection. Immersive games stick with people because they allow time for anticipation, build up, quiet moments, and therefore a much richer payoff. Slower pacing gives weight to the bigger story beats and sharpens the emotional impact. Studies on media absorption consistently show that emotional memory strengthens when the audience has space to process scenes, rather than jumping straight to the next moment. It's common sense really, absorb as you go, really take it in. Playing slowly isn't about dragging out a game or trying to unnaturally stretch its length. It's about giving your mind the conditions that it needs to fully enter that world, conditions that modern pacing sometimes works against. When the pressure to rush disappears, the world becomes easier to feel. Games are experiences. Slow down and experience them. Slowing down in a game changes how it feels to play, but just as importantly, it changes how the game stays with you afterwards. When you take your time, your gaming session feels calmer, quieter, less rushed. You're not constantly thinking about what you need to do next or how quickly you can get to the end. You're just playing. But the real difference shows up later once you've stopped playing. You'll finish a session, get on with your day, and every now and then you'll catch yourself thinking about the game. Just thinking about how it felt being there, a place that you visited, a moment that you enjoyed, and you'll realise something very important. You're actually looking forward to going back. And that didn't always happen before. This is where games stop feeling like something that you're just getting through and they start feeling like something you're spending time with. I've mentioned it so many times in other videos, gaming should feel like an experience, not a task. When you play slowly, you begin to feel more connected to the world. You recognise places without needing the map quite so much. You take the same routes because they feel familiar, not because they're the fastest or the most convenient. You start to feel comfortable in the space. And that comfort turns into a sense of ownership, like the world belongs to you in a weird way. That feeling simply comes from being present, from giving a world enough time that it starts to feel known to you. That's why some games feel personal to people, even though millions of other people play them too. Everyone played the same game, but not everybody played it in the same way. For example, Whiterun in Skyrim feels like my home. This is because I immerse myself and I allow it to feel that way. When games are rushed, they tend to turn into checklists. Everything you do is for a reward, to progress you to the next task, which then leads to the next even better reward. But when you slow down, the tasks and the progress and all those checklists, they don't stay with you. The feeling of the game does. Years later, you are unlikely to remember quest names or item rewards. What you do remember is walking through a medieval village at night, standing still while the music soothed you, taking a longer route, a route as it was intended, no shortcuts, just because you want to admire the scenery. Those moments stick with you because you are actually there for them. And because you were present, those games don't blur together. They stay separate in your mind, distinct. That's why some games still feel vivid years later, while others fade almost immediately, even if you technically enjoyed them at the time. I find it hard to differentiate between my memories of the Call of Duty games, but I can see Skyrim and Dragon Age and Kingdom Come Deliverance and Oblivion as clear as day. They're all very separate games in my mind. For a lot of people, the games that stayed weren't the ones with the biggest moments or the most frequent dopamine hits or constant excitement or anything like that. They were the ones that gave you space, games that didn't rush you around, games where nothing bad happened if you slowed down or stopped for a moment. When a game isn't constantly demanding your attention, you bring more of yourself into it. Your thoughts wander naturally, you notice things that you'd normally run straight past. You start to interpret the world in your own way, explore areas at your own pace, instead of just blindly following prompts and markers. This is the shift slow play creates. Games stop feeling disposable, they stop blending together. They start to matter again, they start to mean more. They offer something deeper, and when you start to see this and feel this, playing slowly won't feel like a rule or something that requires effort, it will just feel right to you. Turning slow play into a routine doesn't mean changing the way you game entirely. It's more about giving yourself moments where the pressure to keep moving disappears, and where you're allowed to engage with the world at the pace it was built for. When this becomes a small habit, immersion strengthens naturally, and gaming finally begins to feel more like an experience that you can settle into. A good place to begin is with the very start of your session. Those first few minutes shape the entire tone of how you're going to play. Jumping straight into a high pressure activity often locks you into a rushed rhythm before you've even warmed up. But if you start with a slower activity, something like walking through a familiar area, listening to the ambience, reading a lore entry, or revisiting a quieter part of the map, your brain eases into the world in a calmer state. Attention stabilizes early and immersion builds more smoothly. You should also try approaching quests and the story as a whole in a different way. Instead of just mindlessly wandering towards one marker and then to the next, try approaching objectives with curiosity rather than urgency. Take a moment to explore the surroundings, give the environment time to communicate what it's meant to. It's not about going from A to B. There might be so much that you can explore in between. When players adopt this mindset, they naturally take in more detail and the story becomes easier to follow. You actually want to see how the story progresses even more when you've had a natural and calming break from it. Another helpful habit is creating space between major events. Instead of completing main quests back to back, allow the quieter periods to breathe a little bit, wander around a little bit, take in the scenery as you explore side quests or just as you explore the scenery in general. These pauses act as mental anchors. They give your mind time to settle before moving on, and that settling is what makes later moments more impactful. Psychology research on emotional processing shows that people absorb emotional experiences more deeply when there are calm moments of nothingness afterwards, and the best games follow that same pattern. It also helps to approach the world as something worth observing rather than something to conquer. When you look around intentionally, even for short periods, you begin to see the small touches that hold that world together. The way that objects are placed inside a home, the logic behind a settlement or a castle's layout, the weather patterns shaping the landscape, these details are often taken for granted, when in reality, a lot of thought goes into the design, and it is something that I personally appreciate a lot. When you take these things in, immersion comes naturally because your brain starts recognizing the world as coherent and believable. For players who feel overwhelmed by modern game design, slow play can also ease the sense of cognitive clutter. When you give yourself permission to pause, your mind stops juggling so many tasks at once, and that drop in mental demand makes gaming feel calmer and more enjoyable. Studies on cognitive overload show that even small reductions in task switching can reduce fatigue and increase satisfaction, which is exactly what slow play does. The final piece of this habit is knowing when to step back. Immersion grows from attention, and attention fades when you're tired. If you feel your focus drifting, if you're really starting to care less about these beautiful little details, it can help to pause the session there. Ending on a calm note keeps the memory of that game warm, and you'll return next time ready to fall back into that slower, more immersive rhythm. Ending before the fatigue sets in strengthens the association between slow play and enjoyment, which makes the habit stick naturally. It's kind of obvious, if you play to the point where you're tired and bored or stressed, that's how you're going to remember that game. That's how you're going to remember that experience. I stop the second that I feel less immersed and less at peace, and it genuinely keeps me looking forward to the next gaming session, and I'm positive it will be the same for you. Playing slowly isn't about dragging out a game or forcing yourself to savour every moment. It's about giving the world room to exist at its intended pace, and giving yourself permission to enjoy it without rushing. When slow play becomes a natural and effortless habit, immersion deepens, stress is reduced, gaming feels richer and steadier and more meaningful than it did before. Let a game fully take you. Sometimes the difference between a game you finish and a game you remember is simply whether you gave yourself time to be there. Now, as you may or may not know, I'm not the best at goodbyes, so